Hello, everybody. Welcome to this evening's last session. Welcome. I'd like to say a really huge welcome to Sarah Gale. One of HRI's goals when pulling this program together was to delve into topics that we don't often discuss at the Harm Reduction International Conference, and psychedelics was definitely top of the agenda here. So we'd like to say a huge thank you to MAPS and to Sara for collaborating with us on this session. And now a little bit about our speaker. Sarah is the Harm Reduction Officer at MAPS. She's been working with MAPS since 2012, coordinating psychedelic harm reduction services at festivals and events worldwide with the Zendo Project. She's also a therapist for the MAPS clinical trials of MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD in Boulder, and believes that developing a comprehensive understanding of psychedelic medicines through research, therapy, and education is essential for the health and well-being of individuals, communities, and the planet. Sara, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Lucy. It's good to be here. It feels like just a short time ago I was in Portugal for the last conference, and so we're definitely in a different format here. And I think one of the benefits is that increased accessibility. There's many of you who are now able to watch this and be part of this conference from our own homes. So good to feel you all. I can't see you, but thank you for being here, those of you who are here live, and those of you who might be watching this recording at a later time. So I just want to begin by presencing where I'm coming to you from. So I live in Boulder, Colorado, USA, which is occupied territories of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. And I am from New Mexico, is my home town of Taos, New Mexico. And I just wanted also to let you know that I won't be using slides today. I know that a lot of us are working with Zoom fatigue and eye strain, and I today do not have slides, so feel free to close your eyes and listen. I am going to be sending some resources that I actually didn't talk to Lucy about this, but some resources that I'm hoping will be able to go up afterwards about the work that MAPS does in the harm reduction space. And so for right now, feel free to just relax. So today I'm going to be talking about psychedelic harm reduction specifically, and specifically community support models and peer support models related specifically to psychedelics. And I just want to take a moment to bring presence and reflection to really all that we have been through as a collective humanity over the past couple of years, and the intensity and the weight of both our individual and collective journeys. And also present some of the ways in which people are trying to cope with these challenging times, including what we're all here this week talking about, which is substances and drug use. And there's what we've been seeing is that there is an increase specifically in psychedelic use during the past couple of years. And there's probably a variety of reasons for that. And psychedelics have really become more mainstream in the last just couple of years. I've been working in this field for almost a decade, and it's just exponential the past couple of years how psychedelics have really landed on the public radar. And so decriminalization movements are taking place here in the US and around the world, and many people are choosing to use psychedelics in a variety of different settings. So while I do work in clinical research, and as Lucy mentioned, I am a therapist working in the MAPS MDMA clinical trials for the treatment of PTSD, today I'm going to be discussing primarily recreational psychedelic use. So throughout my career in working with MAPS, I've really had one foot in each of those domains. So one in clinical practice, exploring the potential benefits of psychedelics in a more therapeutic setting, and then the other in events, festivals, and recreational spaces where people are choosing to take psychedelics. And I feel like being able to work in both of those environments has been really enriching, and I've learned a lot from working in both environments. And I'd just like to share a little bit about myself and how I came into this work. And then I'm going to be diving in talking about MAPS and specifically MAPS's harm reduction initiatives, including the Zendo Project. So when I was younger, when I was 15, my father passed away from an heroin overdose. And really, that was an experience that, combined with some of the other traumas that I was experiencing in my life, really set me on a path that I didn't know at the time, but really set me on a path of healing of my own trauma and what I perceive and experience as transgenerational, intergenerational trauma. And I also was really became very curious about substances and substance use, and really had curiosity with my father's passing around people's relationship to substances, and navigating the spectrum of a variety of different relationships that people have with substances. So I am a therapist. I have worked in private practice. I've worked in clinical trials with psychedelics, and I've focused a lot on trauma. And I really am a proponent of all drug decriminalization and legalization, not just psychedelics. And MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, the organization that I have been spending most of my adult career working in. Rick Doblin, who many of you will recognize, is also, a big advocate for all drug decriminalization and legalization, and not just psychedelics. So I just want to speak that because, as Lucy mentioned, this is this harm reduction conference, which I had the privilege to speak at a couple of years ago in Portugal. The harm reduction movement, which is this huge movement, psychedelic harm reduction is such a small subset of that, and I think that sometimes the psychedelic sphere or field, so to speak, there individuals as well as the movement itself can be perceived often as this term that we hear, psychedelic exceptionalism. And I believe that that is true. I believe that, a lot of, let's see, how do I put this? That it is possible to kind of look at psychedelics as, well, those better drugs, and then there's these other drugs. And there's a lot of issue with that, and for a lot of reasons where I'm not going to dive into today. But I just want to speak that so that you all know kind of the framework that I'm coming from. I'm really grateful to be here talking with you all about psychedelics, and how this kind of ties into my story that I've shared around my family, is that I also do believe that psychedelics do have some exceptional qualities that do make them potential substances for healing. And one of the things that I've held often in my experience is what the place of psychedelics in society to help heal from both individual and collective trauma. And I often think about my father when I do this work, because I do wonder what kind of my father and others in my community, in the larger harm reduction community, who specifically people who we've lost to drug overdoses. What is the place of psychedelics in to be able to address some of the trauma that might be underlying, kind of on this extreme end of the spectrum, substance use that can be potentially damaging or harmful to individuals and their families. And so I think that personally, I believe that it's really important to hold both, which is, what I mean by that is a destigmatized, non-pathologizing approach to substance use, and the recognition of cognitive liberty, and that individuals have the right to choose to put what they want to choose in their bodies and minds. And also a recognition that I think all of us on this planet at a certain point struggle with problematic behaviors, problematic use. Could be substances, could be activities or behaviors, all kinds of things. And so I am really excited today to be talking to you all about how psychedelic peer support and harm reduction is, I think, one of the ways to support collective healing, in addition to the other applications of psychedelics to healing. So I'm going to dive in. I'm going to speak first to just a little bit of the mission and vision of the Zendo Project. And so for those of you who aren't familiar, Zendo Project is a part of MAPS. So it is actually a project of MAPS. It's not its own separate organization. And it was developed in 2012, and we provide professional comprehensive harm reduction education and support for communities to help inform and transform difficult, challenging psychedelic experiences into opportunities for learning and growth. And part of our vision is a world where communities are educated, resourced, and engaged in applying harm reduction principles to support individuals exploring psychedelic states. And while also recognizing that challenging experiences can be opportunities for self-exploration and healing. So during this time in the past couple years, we have not been going to as many festivals and events. So normally Zendo Project does most of our work at festivals and events. We were really born at Burning Man, and I'll say that MAPS has actually been doing psychedelic peer support work since the early 2000s, but the Zendo Project wasn't developed until 2012. And so during this time, it's really been a process for us as an organization, as a program, to really turn inward and look at how we can take what we have been learning at these festival and event environments, and how we can take those tools and those techniques that we've been learning and bring them out into society in ways to bring the presence and compassion that we is central to the work that we do in this peer support work. How can we bring that experience that we've had out into society, right? And so if you want to learn more about the Zendo Project, I'll be sharing a little bit more. Our website is zendoproject.org, and you can learn a lot about our specific approach, our specific training, and how we've trained over the years our volunteers. So we do have longer trainings, and this conversation today is just to give everyone a sense of what the history of the project is and where we're at today, and our sort of space in the field of harm reduction, and a little bit more about the approach that we take in working with people. So the vast majority of people who take psychedelics do so outside of a clinical, therapeutic, or ceremonial environment. And so that's when I'm saying a recreational environment, that's really just what I mean for the purpose of just some delineation here. And at MAPS, we really believe that it's important to provide education and support for people who choose to use psychedelics in what we commonly refer to as a recreational environment. And so anything that's at home, in nature, festivals, events, with friends or alone, and similar environments. And as many of us may be aware, in psychedelic use, as far as we can tell during the pandemic, and this is a bit anecdotal, but I'd love to see some research on it. But what we've seen just in a variety of spaces, both where I work at DanceSafe as well as where I work at MAPS, is an increase of psychedelic use during the pandemic. And I think that a lot of people potentially, are seeing the potential of psychedelics. They're seeing some of the research and some of the reading that is coming out. And unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, including, well, at the very base of it is criminalization. These substances aren't often available and accessible for people especially in a therapeutic way, right? So people often go to underground therapists for treatment. And they also choose to sometimes self-medicate, so to speak, and take psychedelics without a therapist. And I think that it's just really important that as we talk about the potential benefits of psychedelics as a society, and how to integrate psychedelics responsibly, and I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by responsibly into our society and our culture. How can we also explore and really help people have the education and the knowledge that they need to be able to do that safely? Every year, really millions of people use psychedelics outside of any supervised setting, and many of them are increasingly becoming, first-time users, and so we really believe that it is our work at MAPS with the harm reduction work that we do there to also say, hey, these are very powerful substances, and it's also important to adequately understand and mitigate the risk. And all substances come with risk, whether that's over-the-counter, pharmaceuticals, even just non-psychoactive substances come with risk. But especially psychoactive substances, and especially substances as powerful as psychedelics, including LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, and many of the other compounds that are out there. So what we've been doing over the years as a sort of two-prong approach is, on one hand, providing direct service at festivals, and at the other hand, providing education and training, both to the public as well as to specific sectors of professional sectors, such as mental health professionals and first responders. And we've also done trainings for different venues where people might be more likely to be engaging in psychedelic use. So different music and arts sort of venues, and training staff at those venues. And this training really includes a variety of methods to help prevent potentially and transform challenging experiences while in a non-ordinary state of consciousness. And I just want to speak here too that the work that we do is actually, I believe, is really relevant to any experience where people may not actively be on a substance, a psychedelic, but would benefit from emotional and psychological support. So peer support, I think that one thing in the harm reduction community, like peer support is a pretty common term. Peer support groups, peer support education, and I think specifically in the communities of people who use drugs and harm reduction communities, the model of peer support is pretty integrated, I think, into the movement, and including support groups for people who may be struggling with substance use and are wanting to learn a healthier way to navigate their substance use. And so, peer support is not a new term to the harm reduction movement. And so psychedelic peer support is really just kind of building upon a lot of really knowledge and information that has been passed down through many generations. And one of the reasons I love peer support is because it's really a bottom-up initiative instead of top-down. I think it's a community empowering initiative that says, actually, we can help share knowledge and resources amongst our community to help one another support each other. And I think that that's one of the things that we're seeing right now as a society, is that there's this huge mental health crisis, this huge crisis of meaning, I think, crisis of purpose. And we're seeing everything that's happening politically, everything that's happening with the planet, on an individual level, on cultural levels, in terms of BIPOC communities, marginalized communities. And so all of these things, I think, are really coming to the surface, I think, so that we can see them, and so that we can actually look at them and have the opportunity to heal them. And so I think that this work that the Zendo Project is doing around community peer support and holding space for one another in community is really relevant to all different kinds of settings, not just festival settings, but really applicable outside of those settings as well. And so I'm gonna just look at my notes here, transition into speaking to you about the importance of psychedelic harm reduction also for the movement of psychedelics itself. So for those of you out there who are either working in the psychedelic space and field, or interested in working in the field, you may already have been working in the field for a while. I think that it's really good to know that the psychedelic research and exploration of psychedelics therapeutically during the mid 20th century, so like in the 1960s, that there was really, I think that a time that was impacted by lack of harm reduction and education related to psychedelics, and lack of that movement, that the psychedelic sort of movement of the 60s that was really looking at the potential for these medicines to be integrated into society, that I think that it was likely disrupted and impacted in no small way by the inability of the psychedelic movement itself to effectively address and navigate what we can call adverse psychedelic experiences. So that the way that those experiences were handled, because as I mentioned, psychedelics are very powerful substances, and I think that we just didn't know what to do. I kind of think of us, I wasn't there in the 60s, I don't think, but I can imagine the image that kind of comes to mind is that we were, at least in the West, right? Obviously, indigenous cultures and communities have been using plant medicines for many thousands of years. But in the West, when specifically LSD and later on psilocybin kind of came, I think the image that comes to mind is we were just a kind of a bunch of babies with this new toy, like didn't quite know what to do with it. And so I think that that had an impact, the way that that was portrayed in the media, the way that that was seen. There was a lot of fear mongering and fear campaigns that kind of came out. And then the Nixon era and the Reagan era, that was, definitely there were other intentions there, political intentions. But I think that as a community, as a psychedelic community, what I mean is people who choose to take psychedelics, people who are in that space, who believe in the potential of psychedelics. I think that we need to do better this time around during the psychedelic renaissance to be able to adequately address some of those potential emotional, behavioral things that can come up on psychedelics, so that we don't recapitulate those past experiences. So I think that harm reduction is also, or psychedelic harm reduction is also harm reduction for the movement of psychedelics itself. Because the more that we can provide that education, the less people are having these potentially even dangerous experiences. And the more we're creating a field of safety around these substances, the less political and societal backlash I think there will be. And so, I also just want to say here that most people who choose to take psychedelics many people have a very positive experience. And so obviously today we're really leaning into the challenging experiences, but the vast majority of people I think who take psychedelics have a positive, or I don't know if you could say neutral. It's kind of hard to say that with psychedelics, but on the other side of things, I think it's important that we also normalize difficult or challenging experiences, and that challenging experiences are par for the course. So if you're in a setting such as a clinical or ceremonial environment, then it's really understood that a difficulty is really part of the experience, right? In an MDMA assisted therapy for PTSD, or in an ayahuasca ceremony, you're going into that experience expecting that there's going to be challenges, expecting to face your demons, so to speak, knowing that there's going to be stuff there that's going to come up. Hopefully you would be going into that experience with that awareness. But somehow that doesn't get translated into recreational settings, right? So a good example is rave culture, is that, people have been taking ecstasy, which is sometimes contains MDMA, but the percentage of MDMA in ecstasy varies widely. But so oftentimes in those types of raves or shows, when someone's having an experience on ecstasy or MDMA and they start to bump up against something internally, something comes up for them, they start to have a hard time. And sometimes this can look like, feeling self-judgment, self-criticism, shame, all kinds of things that kind of come to the surface. And that in MDMA assisted therapy, we recognize those as the catalyst for healing. Like these things are going to come to the surface and we're going to be able to look at them and work with them, right? Just like how we're doing on a mass level in our society right now, as I mentioned earlier. So these traumas, and the things that we've experienced in our own lives, the things that people, our loved ones have experienced, things that we've suppressed, denied, or rejected, aspects of ourselves that we have tried to turn away from, those things can come up. And so in an MDMA session, that's just normal, but yet in a rave setting or in an event setting where people are taking ecstasy or MDMA in a more recreational environment, when those things start to come up, oftentimes there's this sense of like, there's something wrong here. And so what we're really trying to do, and what we've been working with the Zendo Project, is that psychedelics are going to bring things up for people, and they're going to bring up challenges, and so I think that if people in recreational environments can just be more aware that, oh, right, that experience and the same reasons why psychedelics can be potentially helpful in a therapeutic setting, which means those things catalyzing and coming to the surface, those same things don't just not occur if you're in a recreational setting. In fact, it can be even more exacerbated because what happens is in a recreational setting, people aren't expecting that. They may not have the support that they need in the space when those things arise. And so a lot of what we've been doing over the years is just helping people make that connection to like, these are psychedelic medicines. These bring things up for people. That is normal. Here are some tools to work with that. And that's a lot of what our training has done over the years is, okay, well, how do you work with that? How do you support a peer who is having a challenging psychedelic experience? And these psychedelics really are non-specific amplifiers. You don't know what it's going to bring up, and they can bring up all aspects of ourselves. And so that's a lot of the work that we've been trying to do over the years. And so another thing that we, another aspect of our program is helping to decrease the number of unnecessary and potentially traumatic psychiatric hospitalizations or arrests. Situations where people are ending up in restrained or chemically sedated. So I'm of the belief that a lot of situations that out in festivals, events, or out in society, a lot of situations that end up with people in restraints or sedated can be de-escalated and dealt with in other ways. I think there's absolutely situations where someone is behaving in a way that is potentially harmful to themselves or others that may require some form of physical intervention. And even then, there are ways to do physical interventions like restraint in ways that are more compassionate and kind to the person. And so one of the things that we've really had the opportunity to do over the years is work alongside festival security to be able to do cross-training and help transmit that the knowledge that we have and that experience over to security. And we've had the opportunity also to work with some security teams over the years that have been incredibly harm reduction informed and also very interested in the harm reduction approach and really wanting to cause, to do no harm in the work that they're doing. And so we've really been very lucky to work alongside some amazing security teams over the years. And and then there are adverse medical experiences. And so that's not what we do. We work alongside medical teams at festivals and events who provide medical care. And our space really is for people who are medically stable, medically cleared, and who are just having a challenging emotional or psychological situation. But I think it's really important to name that there's a lot of new substances out there, and that there's a lot of adulterants out there. Once again, thanks to prohibition, that is the case, right? With prohibition, you get all of these different substances that are actually do become dangerous because they're adulterated, they're sold as things that they're actually not, they're mixed with other things. People are taking things without knowing what they're taking. So plug for Dance Safe, test your drugs, always test your drugs. So yeah, I think what I'm going to transition into now is just, I am going to take some questions at the end. So just so you all know, but I just want to talk to you a little bit more about kind of how we work with people. And we really worked with a full spectrum of people, everyone from someone who's having a challenging time, but might be more inward and might be just internally experiencing some emotional or psychological challenges, all the way to more escalated situations. And in the more escalated situations, a lot of what we do is to teach de-escalation tools and techniques to our volunteers to help to de-escalate those situations. And I think that what we've seen over the years, we've assisted over 6,000 people since 2012. And it's hard to keep track of this because you don't really know how many of those situations could have ended up in unnecessary restraint, hospitalization, or sedation, or arrest. But I think that there's a lot of situations where we've been able to help people through to de-escalate them, and that those are situations that could have possibly ended up in a restraint or sedation situation. And so, and I personally believe that we should develop ways to try to avoid things like restraint, sedation, and arrest if possible, to be able to de-escalate things. And that there are tools out there and there are ways to do that. And so a lot of what we train is kind of how to do that. And even though we're not doing a full training today, I can talk with you all a little bit more about what we do. So we have 4 main principles of the Zendo Project. I call them the 4 principles of psychedelic peer support. And they are creating a safe space, sitting and not guiding, talking through and not down, and difficult is not the same as bad. And so these are really the 4 pillars of the work that we do. And so all of the tools and the techniques and the kind of philosophies that we have, we found that they really kind of fall under one or multiple of these pillars. So creating a safe space, and I'll just take some time on this here. So creating a safe space, it really first focuses on the skills of the sitter and the person who is working, sitting and offering support to the person, for them to be able to become a grounded force within themselves, to become someone who's able to be present with the experience of challenge and difficulty of another human. And this can be really challenging, right? It could be really difficult to sit with someone who's having a really challenging time on psychedelics or otherwise, and to work to be that calm, grounded presence. And so we really believe that the presence of someone can just go a long way. It can just be so helpful just to even have someone. One thing that we've seen over the years is that oftentimes people feel really alone and isolated, and that often is something that's coming up for them on psychedelics, is the aloneness that they feel in their life, or the isolation that they feel in their life. And it is really interesting to see people's reaction when they recognize that someone is sitting there and that they're just there as a volunteer to support their experience. And it's just been really wild to see over the years how difficult it is for many of us to take in the reality that someone just really wants to be there to support us. And I think that's been a huge part of this work, and the reason why Zendo Project and MAPS's harm reduction work has really expanded. We've had so many volunteers. We've trained over 5,000 people. We've been able to help so many people, and I think it's really is this movement where people come and get help, and then they become really interested in this work, often want to come back and volunteer to pay it forward. So in that creating of that safe space, it's a physical space. Yes, we do have that physical space at events, but it's also the presence of the sitter. And a lot of what we teach is tools to how to remain present and grounded in the face of challenge, in the face of when someone is in a place of fear or difficulty. Talking through and not down, the other principle that I mentioned is really speaking to, there's this sort of like lexicon, I think, that many of us are used to around like talking someone down, or, and I always felt like that was actually a bit almost demoralizing in a way, or a little bit like, talking down to someone, rather than recognizing that someone is having an experience. They took the substance, they're on the ride. We're not here to stop the ride. We're just here to be with them and support them until it's over. And for different psychedelics, obviously that ride lasts different amounts of time. But a lot of this is building the trust that someone can connect with what we call, often in the MDMA assisted psychotherapy world, we call the inner healer or the inner guide. That given the right environment and the right support, that people are able to connect with their inner healer and inner guide to be able to move them through a challenging experience, a challenging process. And even though what we offer isn't psychotherapy services, it's peer support, harm reduction, a lot of our training does stem from the work that many people have done in the psychedelic therapy space, and is definitely informed by different types of psychedelic therapy. And so that's kind of a little bit about talking through and not down. It's really like trusting the process, making sure that you have, what you need to be able, as a sitter, to be able to trust the process, whether that's support of others or support of, your own training and your own ability to sit in that experience and really trust that process for people. So I did creating a safe space, talking through and not down. So difficult is not the same as bad, is one of our principles that I think can often be misunderstood. And so I just want to kind of clarify what I mean by difficult is not the same as bad. So this doesn't mean that there's no such thing as a bad trip. There are absolutely such things as bad trips. I could give you some examples of that. So experiences where, like I was talking about earlier, you take something and it's actually not what you thought it was. You take a dose that is different than you thought that you were taking. Sometimes people get dosed with things without their consent. That can be a really bad experience. Sometimes really traumatic things can happen for people when they're on a psychedelic. So we're not saying that that there are no such thing as a bad trip. What we're saying is that not every challenging things that comes up on a psychedelic is bad, and that oftentimes when we label something as bad, that immediately conjures up in our mind a sense of, oh, there's nothing to learn here. This is just a bad experience, and I just want this thing to be over. And so the reason why we frame this and phrase this principle the way that we do is to get us to start thinking about these challenging experiences as potential opportunities for learning and growth. And so this ties into what I was speaking to earlier around, well, the power of psychedelics in a therapeutic setting to bring things up for people that then they can work through. And so this applies here with this principle. It's that when these challenging things come up, that can be really an opportunity to look at them And once again, with the right support in the right environment, people can do that. And so with the Zendo Project, really what we're doing is we're creating that environment, creating that support where it potentially doesn't exist. So in recreational environments where it oftentimes doesn't exist. Oftentimes we get people who bring their friends to us and who are just like, I don't know what to do with my friend. I'm tripping too, and this is freaking me out, and I don't know how to deal with it. And so that's kind of the place where if harm reduction services aren't at a festival, that's kind of the place where things can really spiral into a difficult place and really end up in a bad place for somebody. Is if they, their friends don't know what to do with them. Nobody at the festival or event knows what to do with them. And so, that's why we do what we do, is so that we can create that space for people. And then sitting and not guiding is is the last principle. And really this principle is based in that this is peer support work. This isn't therapy. This isn't necessarily shamanic work or guiding. And that really, once again, we're trusting with that person's inner healing process, and also like following what's coming up for them. And this includes like not distracting. So distraction is often a technique that people can use when someone's having a challenging experience, but our model is not a distraction-based model. It's really can we turn toward this experience, and can we be with it, and can we help someone have the support that they need to be able to be with it? And it's also saying that the person often knows, even if they're altered and in this state, they often know what's best for them, and that we really want to follow the cues of the person to be able to learn from them really what they're needing, and that each of us really knows best what's going on for us. And that we don't want to take a heavy-handed approach where we are bringing in a lot of interventions and bringing in a lot of ways in which we're trying to kind of steer or have an agenda for the person's experience. All right, so I'm just going to take a couple more minutes, and then I guess I'll just transition into Q&A. So the last thing I just wanted to talk about is a little bit of the work that we're doing where I'm at here in Denver, Colorado. And it's bringing the training and the work that we've done in harm reduction training that we've done at festivals and events, and bringing that to city first responders. And this is a project that I'm really excited about, and MAPS will we'll have more information about this out there soon. But psilocybin was, or Denver was the first state in the US to decriminalize psilocybin. And as Lucy mentioned in my intro, I sit as the harm reduction advocate on the Denver psilocybin mushroom policy review panel. Say that 5 times fast. And what we're doing there is looking to bring harm reduction training and education to first responders. And the 3 groups that we're working with are emergency medical services, so paramedics, law enforcement, that includes the sheriff's department and the police department in Denver, and then the mental health co-response unit. So in Denver, we're really, Denver is a very progressive city. We are, they're often really ahead of the curve when it comes to implementing really progressive policies. And one of the things that they have in Denver is a mental health co-response unit that goes out on any behavioral health calls, so that those calls aren't being responded to by law enforcement, so that law enforcement can focus on crime. So there's these mental health co-response units, and they will go out either with paramedics and or law enforcement. And so we're also working to train that department as well. And so that's something that I'm really excited about, that we're working on, and that we hope to develop a model here in Denver that we can then, as MAPS, take into other cities, especially cities that have decriminalized psychedelics, and thus are more open to training their city personnel in these types of principles. So it was really good to share with you all about the work that we do. And I just am going to wrap up, and I think it'd be a good time to open up into questions if anyone has any. Oh, good. I was not looking at the chat. So, all right. What's your experience of working with law enforcement in situations that may be escalating and risk ending up with restraint or arrest? Thank you, Giada. I think it's how you pronounce your name. That's a great question. So we've worked in different countries. We've been in addition to the US, we've been in Africa, Africa, Mexico, Costa Rica, Europe. So there's been other countries that we've been in. And so it kind of really has depended on, oftentimes, because we're working in a festival environment, the festival producer's relationship to law enforcement. So different festivals have different relationships to law enforcement, meaning there's different boundaries and rules around law enforcement's presence at an event. And sometimes that's completely out of the hands, obviously, of the festival organizers, and the local law enforcement is really, the deciding factor there. And I'd say that we've actually had really positive experiences at festivals. This isn't, I just want to say that this isn't obviously always or often the case outside of festivals. I think that what happens is that oftentimes law enforcement is aware that there are services. We really try to make them aware that we are there. And so they kind of, I'll just like paraphrase one thing that an officer told me once. And this I've actually heard multiple times in different ways from other officers as well, which is like, I'm so glad you are here because I don't want to deal with these people. And so, so in other words, that's kind of been the response that we've had. We've had some really positive experiences. We've also had experiences where somebody who was on a substance actually did do something that was like behaviorally, inappropriate, and actually did end up needing to go with law enforcement. And in those situations when that's happened, and that's not up to us, obviously, we have to defer to law enforcement. We've actually been able to make those handoffs, I think, better for the individual who's having to go. We had one situation with someone where it was a nudity thing. So, someone who public exposure, and there wasn't really anything that we could do about that. And we really talked to this person and said, this is what's happening, and they're gonna have to take you in. And this person really, like, we talked to this person, and I think us being able to talk to the person, and then us be able to talk to law enforcement and say, hey, this is what's going on for this person. Can we have some time? Can we just have some place to make this transition? Because nudity, getting naked, is something that happens with people sometimes on psychedelics. And the officer was really understanding. And I think that handoff, if we hadn't been there to kind of support that, I think that handoff could have been a lot more traumatic for the person and just the people around them. And so we've had luckily at festivals and events, we've had really positive experiences. Okay, how can we design psychedelic harm reduction education programs to be flexible enough to be context specific and culturally sensitive? Yes, great question. So that, is another thing that we've really been sitting with and working with at MAPS. Right now at MAPS, we're really in the process, both in our clinical MDMA-assisted psychotherapy clinical trials, as well as in harm reduction, looking at health equity, and looking at how can we really, whether it's in the MAPS MDMA work, like how can we train more therapists of color to be able to provide more therapeutic services to patients of color. I think that is really, that's also what is needed in harm reduction training. It's really to both bring in, obviously, like increase the number of people who we are training who represent different marginalized communities, because often the reality is that safety, right? When we talk about safety, it's very different if you're a white person going into a predominantly white space and you're tripping on a psychedelic than if you're a person of color going into that space, right? Your experience of safety is going to be so different. So as you're saying here, right, it's really context specific. And so one of the things that we've been doing at Burning Man specifically is working with different groups. There was, right before COVID happened, there was it was an organization called the Queer Dome that opened up, that was really their intention in being on Playa was to create similar harm reduction services. And we helped them in training their volunteers. And so then they had a separate space that was on the playa at Burning Man, that was really, welcoming and saying, this is a place that you can go if you identify as queer and you want to come receive harm reduction services. So there's creating separate spaces, but then there's also the integration, right, of individuals from those communities into trainings, and making sure that whatever organization is providing that harm reduction training is prioritizing that as priority number one. So thank you for that question. That's really important. And I also want to speak here to that, things like race and gender and sexual orientation, when we talk about set and setting in relation to psychedelics, we often don't think about that. But I think it's really important to name that those things really do impact specifically our mindset. People from different communities, different demographics are going to have a very different experience with psychedelics based upon their cultural identity, based upon their cultural location. And so it's just really important to recognize that really influences set. I mean, especially as it relates to drugs and substances, where we have people of color who've been so disproportionately, put in prison and jail, and who've been, sorry, I'm getting a little bit emotional. It's really important to name that, that people who are choosing to use psychedelics based upon their experience with, law enforcement or with the judicial system in relation to substance use are going to have a unique experience. So thank you. I really appreciate this question. Could you share more about the guiding statements activities used to bring out and honor our inner healers? Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. Oh, I see what happens. I click on thanks for clicking on that. Okay. So some statements that I find myself using when I'm working with someone, whether it's in the Zendo space or in a therapy space, is oftentimes what people do is they kind of ask you questions. Like, what should I do? What do you think about this? They're oftentimes, if they're struggling, they try to get answers to things. And I think that's just being human. Oftentimes we're kind of asking and looking outside of ourselves for those answers. And we, I engage and we train our volunteers that, it's okay to, if people ask you questions about, how would you deal with this, or, ask questions about what they should do and they're panicking. It's okay to, provide some of your own life experience, or share a little bit about, some suggestions, especially some things around reframing. Like if someone is having like a cognitive narrative come up that is obviously really related to their trauma and seems to be causing them a lot of stress and pain, like it's okay to offer different frames of viewing something, different frames of viewing that thing that they're struggling with, right? But what we do is we really try to kind of like turn that question back to them and really invite them. Like, I wonder what it would be like if you kind of sat with that question and kind of went inside with it and ask your own, your own this is where learning people's terminology around this can be really helpful, because some people call it something different, right? Inner healer, inner guide, inner wisdom, spirit, soul. There's so many different terms that some will land for people and some won't for others. So I tend to use one, at least if I don't know somebody, which usually I don't, because this is not a, people just come into the space. It's not like a clinical trial where you get to know them first. So I often start off with pretty neutral things and less on the kind of more spiritual side of things, because I know that a lot of people, don't resonate with, or in fact have trauma around spiritual or religious terminology. So just something like, maybe see what happens if you check in with yourself around that. One question that we get a lot is, am I safe? And, we have, people will kind of question it. It won't always come out in that specific question, like, am I safe? But like, it will come out in like, am I okay? Am I safe? And I think it's perfectly okay to remind someone, you're in a safe place. I'm here with you. We're going to get through this together. I'm here to support you. I'm not going anywhere. So to remind someone of the safety of their environment, right? Don't just like let them sit in that. But then sometimes if someone is what we call looping, kind of asking that again and again and again, then oftentimes I think it kind of points to like a bigger existential question, where it doesn't really matter how many times as a sitter you kind of like reassure someone that they're in a safe environment, but that almost it becomes more of like an existential exploration. And so then at those points you can really invite people into like, I hear that you're not feeling safe. Would it be okay for you to kind of feel that feeling of unsafety with you? And sometimes I can really open people up into an experience of like, oh my goodness, my whole life I haven't felt safe. I've never felt safe. Right. And so I think it's really a balance, and really just deep listening to, and really being there present in listening. Because oftentimes if you're listening to someone and not just talking at them, then there's more space for that inner healer to just show up naturally. So that's why a lot of what we kind of train our volunteers in is not interjecting a lot, but just like being just listening, and not trying to kind of like, if someone asks questions, right? Sometimes when people are in psychedelic spaces, they're asking a lot of questions, and they might be asking a lot of those out loud. Those questions may not be for you. They just might be some existential process that the person is going through, and that it's actually really helpful to just listen, rather than trying to say like offer your existential perspective on their question. Thank you for that question. That's great. Okay, so we have a couple minutes here. MAPS has made incredible progress in shaping the acceptability of psychedelics through the lens of veteran recovery from PTSD. The strategy seems to me making headway. Who do you think is our next unusual ally? That's a great question. I am not sure, but yeah, I like that, asking this question about PTSD. I will say that I think that MAPS has done, in my perspective, obviously I'm biased, I think MAPS has done a wonderful job of bridging things. I think right now we really need bridges. We really need individuals and organizations that help bridge. Right now we're in such a polarized place on our planet. Things are so, there's these really parallel, completely different, completely separate realities where people can't get on the same page. And it's a really, kind of split that we're experiencing. And so just, I really think that we need more organizations and individuals who can help be bridges between people who can't hear and listen. And I do think that MAPS is an organization that has done an incredible job of being able to reach people all across the political spectrum, many different types of trauma experience and backgrounds. And so, yeah, that's a great question. All right, well, we're at the top of the hour, so I just want to thank you all for being here, and yeah, encourage you all to just check out the website zendoproject.org, and look forward to connecting in the future. Thank you.